get your take, Secretary, on the Middle East situation right now. We were just having a conversation a few minutes about the Qataris, and then there's Syria. The Trump administration says that it has discovered evidence that the Assad regime is planning another chemical weapons attack. How do you believe the United States should be dealing with Syria right now if, in fact, Assad does do another chemical attack?
Well, I do think that clearly it's terrible if the leader of a country is thinking about, yet again, poisoning his and killing his own people. But I think the issue here, Maria, is that we don't have an overall serious strategy. It's one thing to do kind of one-off things and make a lot of statements, but the problem is we don't have a strategy. And I had a very interesting time watching the Senate Armed Services Committee hearings where Secretary Mattis and General Durnford were there, and John McCain just flat out said, what is going on here? We need a strategy. And I have to say, even John Bolton this morning in the Wall Street Journal is writing about a strategy. We can't just threaten and not have a strategy. That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah, I mean, a strategy that would include our allies around the world, right? I mean, how are we going to have allies in the Middle East when we have what's taking place in Qatar as well? So the U.S. is facing tension with the Qataris. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, as you know, cut diplomatic ties with Qatar for reportedly supporting terrorist organizations in the Middle East. The Trump administration now has to decide to either back Saudi Arabia, take a hard stance against terror and the Qataris, which holds, obviously, a U.S. military base. So what is your answer to this delicate situation here with our main military base in Qatar and so many of its allies saying they are the supporter of terrorism?
Well, I think it is complicated beyond belief, and the way you describe it is absolutely right. I think that it is a mistake for us to be perpetuating a division between Qatar and the GCC countries. That I have heard that there is some attempt to mediate a little bit on this. And as you pointed out, we do have a very important base in Qatar, and it is complex, but we do not need to be contributing to further divisions because the problems already between the Saudis and the Iranians is very difficult, and we need to take a much deeper, longer look at how to behave with the Middle East. It's a crisis in the Middle East that is spreading to other parts of the world, and we need to be, again, to have a larger, longer strategy base on that.
I mean, you know, we had Naguib Sawiris on, Egypt's third richest person, and he said that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. He said it doesn't matter what you call them, that's what they are. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's hard to designate, having been the person that originally put a lot of groups on a terrorist organization aspect. I think that we made a mistake, the United States, in calling for elections too soon in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood was organized. The rest of the political players there were not. I think it's important to understand what is going on in Egypt, what is going on in terms of all the religious and terrorist conflicts that are there in the Middle East, and again, the need for an overall strategy. And by the way, I think that it is time for the Trump administration to put out its national security strategy. It is by law, Goldwater-Nichols, that a new administration has to put out a strategy, and there are now 57 members of Congress that are calling for them to put out a national security strategy. Frankly, I follow this all very carefully. I have no idea what the Trump administration has in mind for an overall strategy in the Middle East or anywhere else, frankly.
And it seems that the public was largely pleased with his meeting in Saudi Arabia, with his foreign trips so far. How is President Trump doing in terms of foreign policy, in your view?
Well, I think that maybe that immediate reaction to the Middle East trip was one thing, but then he went to Europe where he didn't exactly get a good reaction. And there's a new Pew poll out now where it is very clear that President Trump has very low respect anywhere in the world, and also that the United States has lost its position. I find that so hard to deal with because nothing made me prouder than to represent the United States. And I think we need to understand that America's national interests are embedded in what is going on in the rest of the world. And I was very troubled when all of a sudden there was a discussion saying that we didn't care about the global community, that we only had to worry about our national interests. our national interests are very important, but they can only be met within a climate where others listen to what we have to say, where there's a respect for what we do, and where they understand what our strategy is, because we need our allies and friends to work with us, whether it's on North Korea or the Middle East or in Ukraine, all parts of the world.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points, Secretary. Now, you're making a keynote speech during a series of events dubbed Disinformation Week. What is the goal of the dialogue? Tell us about Disinformation Week.
Well, I think we are living in a very new era where there are hybrid forms of influencing policy, and one of them is disinformation. And I just came back from Ukraine, a country that's clearly been under pressure, and a lot of it has to do with the way disinformation was used there for a number of years to undermine the whole approach of many Ukrainians who want to be a part of Europe. And generally, there is a whole way now that information and information technology is being used in order to confuse people. And listening just generally, I do think that there is a question these days in terms of how opinions dominate facts. And so I am very pleased to be a part of panels to do with this and exploring it, because hybrid warfare is very much a part, disinformation is very much a part of that, and we need to know who is playing us, frankly.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important.
No,
Thank you.
For sure. I want to ask you about your latest tweet, Secretary. It's getting a lot of talk. Twitter user Jacob Smith posted online saying that he took a picture of you driving a car while he was in an Uber. You then tweeted this: in case you're wondering, I have a 5-star rating. Is becoming an Uber driver the next step in your career? Why did you do that, Secretary?
Well, because I have to tell you, I do love to drive, and I was driving 3 men from our office to a meeting, and I am a good driver, so 5 stars is absolutely right.
All right. Secretary, good to see you today. Thanks so much for joining the conversation. We appreciate your time.
Good to see you.
And to you. Secretary Madeleine Albright joining us.